Another day, another declutter. Hello and thank you so much for tuning in. So today we're going to be tackling my blushes. That is the drawer that I have sitting out in front of me, and there's also another drawer below with some blush palettes. But I'm actually going to be looking to get rid of quite a few blushes here, mostly because a lot of the blushes that I have, I don't think that they really suit my skin tone very well. There was a lot of these that I bought thinking that they'd work a lot better for me than they ended up working. So going to be getting rid of quite a few just based on that alone. So let's go ahead and start tackling what is in here. So first I thought I'd go ahead and tackle my Too Faced Love Flush blushes. As you can see, I have 4 of them here. I actually had 5, but a friend of mine came over and one of the blushes that I had that definitely didn't suit me suited her a lot more, and it was actually a blush that she had panned. So I gave it to her, and hopefully I can go ahead and pass these along too, or most of these, because I know that several of these also don't work very well on my skin tone. So first I have the shade I Will Always Love You. One of the things that roped me into buying these initially was the love song theme names for all of these. And I Will Always Love You, the Whitney Houston version, is one of my favorite songs. It's like the first song I can remember like singing growing up, so definitely was roped in with a lot of just the names alone. It is a pretty color, but unfortunately just doesn't work very well for me. It's like this peachy color, but as you can probably tell, yeah, it's got quite a bit of a white base. It does have a little bit of a sheen to it, but the white base on it is just, it's too strong for this to work on my skin tone. And keep in mind, I'm swatching this on the back of my hand. The back of my hand is actually lighter than my face. So if it's pulling quite ashy on my hand, you know, you can only imagine how ashy it would pull on my face. So I'm gonna go ahead and pass this one along. Next up, I have the shade Love Hangover. And this is another sort of like peachy colored blush, a little bit more on the pink peachy side of things though. And that's that one. A little bit more pigmented and a little bit more color to this, but honestly, if I'm going to reach for a pink blush, it's going to be one that's probably going to have a little bit more depth than this one. So I'm going to go ahead and pass this one along as well. Next up, this is How Deep Is Your Love, and it's going to be really hard to get rid of this one because How Deep Is Your Love is my favorite Bee Gees song, and one of my favorite songs just in general. But I know this color doesn't work out all that well for me either. It's a little bit of a richer pink, and again, like I could hang on to this. It does work out okay on my skin, but I just feel like these Love Flush blushes aren't as pigmented on the cheeks as I would like, so I'm gonna actually go ahead and pass along this one as well. Last up, we've got Your Love Is King, and this is the deepest of the blushes and also another song that I absolutely love. I am basically a Sade stan, so if I was going to hold on to one, it probably would be this one, since this one is the one that is the most pigmented, is the deepest in tone. So I think I'll hang on to this one for now, but again, I don't know that it's necessarily the type of color I'd be super prone to reaching for, but we'll see. This one definitely shows up on my skin the best, so I'll keep this one for now. So the next 2 blushes I have are both from the Sephora collection. These are their Matte Perfection blush duos. I think these are a more recent addition to Sephora's product lineup. I picked these up during the April VIB sale. So these are the 2 shades that I have. This one here is called Poppy, and then this one here is called Tiger Lily. So obviously you get 2 shades in each one, and then you can kind of swirl the 2 shades together to get another shade, so technically 3 shades in one. And I believe these are like 14 bucks, so they're not that bad price wise, as are most things in the Sephora collection. But I went ahead and swatched them here on the back of my hand. As you can see, this variety over here is the shades from the Poppy blush. So this is the lighter shade, that's the darker shade, and that's the 2 kind of mixed together. And this is the Tiger Lily variety of blushes. This is the darker shade, this is the brighter shade, and then this is the 2 shades mixed together. So I really like these blushes, and they're very pigmented. They stay on very nicely, and I would definitely recommend these. Next up, I have these Laura Geller baked blushes, and I'm probably going to be getting rid of a couple of these as well. The first one I have here is the shade Honeysuckle. And this is one that I thought would be pretty flattering on my skin because of the sort of brown tones running throughout it. But I feel like this actually shows up pretty pretty light on the skin. Yeah, I mean, you can see that. The thing about these Laura baked blushes is that they do have quite a bit of a sheen to them. So I can get away kind of with using these as like a highlighter, but there are much better highlighters that I'd rather reach for. So I am definitely not eager to hold on to this one. So I'm going to go ahead and declutter it. This next one I have is the shade Pink Grapefruit. And again, this one I think is one that's a little bit too light on me. I think it's a little bit more flattering than Honeysuckle, but not by a whole lot. I mean, you can at least see some of the pink tone that's there, but as you can see, it's still got quite a bit of a white base on my skin tone. So I'm gonna go ahead and pass this one along as well. Last up we have Tropic Hues, which is the iconic blush from this line. And this one is the most flattering one out of them all on me, and the one that I wear the most often. It definitely gives off, I think, actually NARS Orgasm vibes, because it has a sort of pinkish base or pinkish hue to it, and then it has kind of a golden sheen. So it is really, really pretty. I'm very tempted to keep this basically as a highlighter, or maybe even kind of like a blush topper of sorts. So I think I'm going to go ahead and hold on to this one for now. I do have another Laura blush product, but this is the Baked Gelato Swirl blush, and this is in the shade Rosewater. I believe this was gifted to me by my mother. It came in a gift set with some other Laura products, and I had been wanting to try this formula. I didn't necessarily have my eye on this color in particular, but I was curious about the formula. And again, this one kind of comes off more so as like a blush topperish kind of shade. It definitely has a bit of a sheen to it as well, and it has these like gold glitters running through it. It is a really pretty kind of like cooler tone pink shade with some golden glitters in it, but I don't know exactly how this pulls on my skin. I honestly can't really remember, so I am tempted to kind of hold on to it just to see, but I'll go ahead and put it in kind of like a maybe pile of sorts. This next product is the Anastasia Beverly Hills Blush Trio in the variety Berry Adore. And again, I've gone ahead and just swatched the shades here on the back of my hand, so you can see the lightest shade, the one in the middle, and then the darkest shade. And I am going to go ahead and keep this collection of blushes. All of these tones do fit my skin tone. I like the fact that I have a coral in here that I can pull for as well, since I feel like a lot of coral blushes that I've purchased in the past aren't really that great for my skin. And if I do feel the need to reach for a pink tone blush, there is this one here. So I'm going to go ahead and hold on to this trio. Next up, I have these Japonesque Velvet Touch blushes, and the packaging on these is really, really beautiful. It's like a watercolor design, and each compact obviously has a unique design to it, but I do think I'm going to be getting rid of a couple of these here as well. First up, this is the shade 04, and this is a really gorgeous sort of cool tone pink with a hint of lavender in it, and I definitely want to hold on to this one actually, because if I ever do want to reach for sort of more of like a bubblegum or almost like Barbie pink type of color, this is one that suits my skin tone, and it's, again, very hard to come across these. I think the little bit of purple that's added into this blush definitely helps it come off a little bit better on my skin tone than other blushes, so this is definitely one that I'm going to hang on to. Next up, this is the shade 05, and as you can tell, this one doesn't look like very much of a blush at all. It definitely looks more akin to a highlighter, and that's essentially what this product is. It's kind of like a satiny highlighter of sorts, very kind of gold shade, and I mean, it does give like a nice sheen to the skin, but again, I just feel like when it comes to highlighters, first of all, I have a lot of highlighters, so the idea that I would perhaps reach for this one for a subtle gold is kind of, you know, probably not gonna happen. So I am going to go ahead and pass this one along. It is beautiful, but definitely not something I think I'd be keen on reaching for. Last up, I have the shade 06, which again doesn't look like very much of a blush at all. In fact, this reads much more like a bronzer for somebody with a light medium skin tone to me. I'll go ahead and swatch it, and you'll see this one doesn't show up all that well on my hand. Yeah, I mean, it shows up, but it shows up lighter than me, as you can see. So this one almost would work as like a sort of like a setting powder for me, but I'm definitely not going to hold on to a blush, what's supposed to be a blush formula, to use as a setting powder. So I'm going to go ahead and pass this one along as well. So I have a couple of Sephora products that I forgot to show earlier. This is just their regular blush, and I believe they've actually redone like the packaging on these. So if you go in the store now, they no longer have these clear lids. They actually have a lid that corresponds to the actual color of the blush inside. So this is the shade Hot Flush, and I remember getting this thinking that it would be a good dupe for something like NARS Taj Mahal, which I still to this day want to add that blush to my collection nonetheless. But this is a really gorgeous, very warm orange shade with a very gold sheen to it. It looks really, really beautiful on the cheeks. So I'm definitely going to go ahead and hold on to this one. Next up, I will showcase my NARS blushes. So this first NARS blush that I have here, and the only full-size NARS blush that I have, is in the shade Liberte or Liberte. And this is a really nice sort of coral color, a sort of deep coral color, which I really like because it works very well on my complexion. So this is one that I am going to hold on to. The next NARS blush I have here is one of the Sephora birthday gifts or VIB Rouge renewal gifts, and this is in the shade Golue, and it is a very nice sort of deeper pink tone. Again, if I reach for a pink, it's going to be something that's a little bit richer and something that's going to actually show up on my skin. It's actually, I would say, almost leans towards a plum when you start to kind of blend it and buff it out into the skin. I am going to hold on to this one. I think it's actually really nice. The last NARS blush I have, I almost forgot about this one, is the iconic Orgasm, and I love how this was an Ulta birthday gift. I love how they packaged it in this like big NARS box as if you were getting a full-size blush, but in reality it's just another one of these miniature sized ones. So this is what the blush looks like on the inside. Honestly, I was not impressed by this. As iconic as this blush is supposed to be, first of all, it's not even a blush on me, and even for it not to be all that flattering on my skin tone, I just don't really see who would be into this blush. It's just, I don't know, it's just very, it just doesn't even come off as like as high quality as these two, the way it kind of just buffs out, and then it's just chock full of these rather large pieces or flecks of gold glitters, which to me don't even look very flattering on the skin. So personally, I'm not a fan of this, and I don't really see the hype behind it either. I'd much rather reach for something like Lorac Tropic Hues if I wanted a sort of peachy pink tone that has somewhat of a gold shift to it. So I'm definitely getting rid of NARS Orgasm. Speaking of peachy pink blushes, this is a random one that I have from the brand ModelCo. I got this in an Ipsy bag some years back, and this is the shade Peach Bellini. And this is a really pretty sort of peachy to gold blush. This is what I always envisioned NARS Orgasm would actually look like. This is a very pigmented color, and it does swatch very well. The lighter pink base in here is a little bit questionable on my skin tone, but I do still really like the amount of shine that this gives, and this is something that I would definitely be prone to reach for as a blush topper. So I'm going to go ahead and hold on to this one. Next up, I have this Milani powder blush, and this is one of the rose blushes, and this is the shade Blossomtime Rose. And again, this is another kind of like NARS Orgasm-esque type of blush. As you can probably tell, it has a gold sheen to it, and as you can see probably from the very perfect rose pattern going on in this has barely gotten used by me, and mostly has to do with the fact that, again, I don't think that this is really all that flattering on my skin tone. Again, still think that this performs way better than NARS Orgasm, to be honest, but it's just, it doesn't really do it for me. It's very, very subtle, doesn't show up very much except to leave the slightest gold sheen to it. So if I'm going to keep one of these types of gold sheen blushes, then I really think that one that I just showed from ModelCo makes a lot more sense, as well as Laura Geller's Tropic Hues. So I'm going to go ahead and pass this one along. It's Blushed Fingers. Next up, I have the Black Radiance Artisan Color Baked Blush, and this is in the shade Toasted Almond. This is a really gorgeous bronzy orangey color. Definitely a very nice blush tone for darker skin, but I just feel like I couldn't ever really get this one to work for me. It always went on kind of patchy. Of course, it's swatching fine now, but I just feel like I had trouble applying this to the face. What I think I'm going to do is keep this in my collection to try to give it a last chance, because I love the tone of this, and to have a blush in this beautiful color, especially from the drugstore, would be really nice. So I'm going to hold on to it, give it a try. If it doesn't work out, I will go ahead and declutter it in the future. Next up, I have these 3 Lorac blushes. These are their Color Source Buildable blushes, and honestly, I don't know if I'm going to part with any of these. The first one I have here is the shade Infrared, and as the name suggests, this is a really nice red tone blush. It does have a sheen to it. This is a satin formula. They do have both satins and mattes in this formula. It's very soft, very powdery, as you can see. Definitely can go in with a light hand as far as these are concerned. Very pigmented too, as you can see. But I just love the tone of this. I definitely feel like this is one that I reach for more in the fall, but it is very pigmented and quite gorgeous and stunning. A lot of these deeper blushes that I have for the fall tend to be berry tones, so to have one that is really more so in the red category is nice. This next one I have is in the shade Ultraviolet, and this is a matte blush, and this is a really interesting, sort of like almost neon pastel lavender. It might look a little bit concerning, maybe swatched out on the back of my hand, but this definitely shows up much nicer on the face, and you can really buff it into the skin as well. And I just like having a purple blush. I do have some purple highlights, and I love wearing purple eyeshadow, so it's nice to have a color that can kind of coordinate with those types of tones from time to time. Last but not least, and this is actually surprisingly my favorite one out of all of the Lorac blushes that I have, this is the shade Cinematic. And I know what you're thinking. This looks so bland and boring in the pan. It probably looks like it wouldn't even suit my skin tone. And I kind of thought the same thing, but I'm really glad that I ended up swatching this in store, because it actually is a really gorgeous neutral blush for my skin tone. And again, it's probably going to swatch terribly here. But if I can, I might try to insert a clip of this on my cheeks, because this is the most beautiful neutral blush that I have in my collection. You can kind of see as I'm like blending it out, it does get darker than what it appears in the pan. So it's just a really pretty neutral mauve tone blush, and this is one of those blushes I can just reach for because it just goes with everything, and I love that. I have very few blushes in my collection that I can say that about, and this is one of the few, so I'm definitely hanging on to this one. Next up, I have a couple of these Becca mineral blushes. This one is in the shade Songbird, and this is in the shade Lantana. So honestly, I don't know what I was thinking when I got this shade up here, Songbird, because as you can see, it's almost like non-existent on my skin tone. I think when I swatched, I thought that I swatched this in store, and that's why I decided to pick it up, but I think I may have swatched another blush that was like sitting in its place that I thought was Songbird. It's not a bad color, it just barely shows up on me, so there's no need for me to hold on to this. I'm sure there's somebody that this would suit much better, so I will get rid of it. And then this shade down here, Lantana, you would have to pry this from my cold dead hands. I absolutely love this blush. I love red orange tones, and this is one of the best red orange blushes that I own. I wouldn't be surprised if this is one of the best ones on the market. It just blends out so beautifully and is very pigmented, as you can see. A couple of controversial blushes coming up. First, I have the Kat Von D Lolita blush. This was also meant to be an eyeshadow, but I specifically bought this to use it as a blush. I no longer purchase from Kat Von D, but anything that I do own from her prior to when I made that decision, I am keeping, at least the things that I want to keep. And this is a blush that honestly I do want to hold on to. Probably not one that I will mention really at all here on my channel, which is unfortunate because the actual color of this, again, is one of those like neutral mauve blushes that just goes pretty much with anything. It's a little bit pinker than Cinematic from Lorac, but it really is quite neutral. And again, I don't have a ton of those in my collection, so it's a real bummer that Kat Von D is not a great human being, quite honestly. So I'm going to hold on to this, but it's definitely one that I probably won't feature very much here on my channel, if at all. Next up, I have a Wet n Wild blush, and this is in the shade Dare to Soar. This was from their, what was it? I think Birds of Flight collection, if I'm not mistaken. I bought this on a whim. I saw it in Ulta, and this was a shade that, you know, interested me from the collection. So, and I think this is when the collection was on its way out. Now this, as a blush, I'm like, that's a little bit of a stretch. I did actually see, I believe it was Ashley Christina, I think she used this shade in a tutorial she did on like blush draping, and it looked so beautiful on her. So that's why I'm like, oh, maybe I should hold on to this and try to do something like that with this blush. I don't know. I feel like if I shear it out, it does look nice. And I'm just imagining, you know, pairing this on top of other blushes when I want like a really dramatic or more editorial look. So yeah, I'm gonna hang on to this one for now. It's just definitely not one that I would reach for super often. Next up, I have another blush that is relatively new to my collection. This is one of the Cover FX monochromatic blush duos, and this is the shade Sweet Mulberry. This is the deepest variety that they offer, and when I saw this, I was like, oh yeah, definitely gonna get it. Again, I just saw a nice mauve option on the market, which is very rare. I don't feel like these colors are done very often, and so that is what the matte shade looks like. Really nice mauve tone. As you can see, it can actually go quite dark, so I would say even if you have a deeper complexion than me, this would be a wonderful blush option. And I think that again, it would act as a neutral blush that would probably go with a lot of things. So definitely a very nice tone, and not one that I have seen elsewhere on the market. And then this is the shimmery tone, which is also really, really pretty. Again, very mauve, and because of its mauve nature, I think it does lean more neutral. You can definitely make it look more neutral. It's definitely not as colorful or as intimidating as it looks in the pan. I think especially or particularly if you have a deeper skin tone. So these are the Shiseido Minimalist Whipped Powder Blushes, and this first one that I have here is the shade IO05, and it's a really nice kind of like plummy color. Again, more mauve, more neutral, and one of the reasons why I really like this color. And these definitely have a whipped texture. They do apply just as whipped as they kind of look in the jar. But when they say whipped powder blush, they really do mean it. These do blend out and blur out to this sort of soft powder formula. These are really, really quite nice and quite elegant on the skin. They just blend in so nicely and evenly. I think these definitely mesh better with the skin than a traditional powder blush. So love that shade. Again, one of those more neutral shades that can kind of go with a lot of different eye looks or makeup looks. And then the second one here is Sayoko 06, and this is a really interesting color. It's basically like a muted, and you can kind of see how sort of like jelly-like and whipped this formula is, but this is like a muted red color. It's really, really interesting, and not a color that I knew that I wanted in my life until I saw this. But it really does truly mimic the vibe of a red, but it's, as you can see, it's just much more muted. So if you're somebody who is afraid of red blush, like red powder blush, you think that that's a little bit too extreme, this might be a really good option for you because of the more desaturated nature of it. So yeah, I'm definitely going to be holding on to both of these. Also, I forgot to mention that I do find these to be pretty long lasting for these to be, you know, cream products. And I think again, it's because they do sort of set into place and set to more of a soft powder formula. Okay, I went ahead and did like a fresh reset on my hands because the makeup wipe was just not working anymore. So I had to like scrub all of the stains that were on my hands off, and my fingers are still partially stained, but I think we're ready to be back in business to tackle the last part of my single compact blushes, which are the MAC blushes that I own. So I do own quite a few of these. First up, the lightest shade I have by far is this one, which is the shade Gingerly, kind of a cult classic. And I was hoping because that Lorac shade worked so well for me that maybe this one would work for me too. And unfortunately, that was not the case. I really cannot get this blush to show up on my skin really at all, even kind of blending it out. It basically just stays that same sort of like almost like ashy peach color on me. So this is one that I can definitely pass along to somebody whose skin it would suit more. Next up, I have the shade Sur, spelled S-U-R. This was from their monochrome collection that they did, I think at the very beginning of the year. And I actually only recently picked this blush up. I kept looking at it because I thought it could be, again, one of those neutral category of blushes that would just work really well on my skin tone. And lo and behold, I was right. As you can see, this one blends out to be a little bit darker than how it swatches, and is a really nice sort of neutral tone blush. So I guess you could say my go-tos for like an everyday neutral color blush would be this one here, the Lorac one, the Kat Von D one whenever I would reach for that, and then the Shiseido whipped blush in the shade IO. So those are kind of like all the like neutral tone blushes that I have, but I'm really glad that I added this one to my collection because again, I feel like these shades are really hard to find on the market. I do wish that this was permanent though, because I feel like I am very familiar with MAC's blush offerings and I don't feel like they have a shade that's close to this in their regular lineup. So I would have loved to have seen them make this tone or this color permanent. Next up, I have the shade Pinch Me, which is kind of like this peachy coral tone blush, and that's what that one looks like. I mean, the MAC blush formula, I think, to me is really reliable, so this is one that I honestly don't reach for super often, probably because I don't reach for coral blushes super often. I think I am going to hold on to it for now, but I feel a reckoning with my coral blushes coming soon, just because, you know, I only ever reach for so many of them and I only reach for this tone every so often. So basically, spoiler alert, I'm pretty sure the rest of these MAC blushes I have I am going to be keeping. So this is more so me swatching my MAC blush collection. But this is the shade Devil. This is another really great sort of like red orangey color. And there it is. It's pretty similar to Lantana, except this one I feel is a little bit more orange. Lantana is definitely more red, or has more red in it. But both really, really stunning colors for a brighter blush. Next up, I have the shade Burnt Pepper, which is this kind of nice like terracotta color. Pretty nice, just warm, neutral blush. Nothing too crazy, but it is a really nice sort of natural color warm blush. This next one here is Diva Don't Care, and this was another one of the shades from the MAC monochrome collection. And I bought this one also thinking that it would be like a nice neutral tone blush. This one is definitely a bit deeper, so this would have been, again, another awesome like neutral tone blush for somebody with a darker complexion. I really wish they would have kept this one permanent as well, but I do still wear this as a blush. I kind of just go in with a lighter hand, but as you can see, if you really buff it out, you can get it to be quite dark and plummy. But with a lighter hand, it definitely applies closer to how it appears in the pan. Then last but not least, we have Fever, which is a real classic, and I absolutely love this one. This one feels a little bit drier in the pan, as you could maybe hear from when I was swatching it, but it definitely doesn't apply any differently than the other MAC blushes. Goes on very pigmented, blends out really nicely though, and it's just a beautiful color. Definitely one that I'm inclined to reach for in the fall. I think both of these actually would make really, really nice blushes for the fall. I feel like at this point it's just become tradition for me to always forget at least one thing in these videos. So the one blush that I actually skipped over in here, technically it's not a blush, but I do keep it in here as a blush, and it's the Lancome Le Monochromatique in the shade Haute Couture. And these are essentially these types of cream products. They're supposed to be multi-purpose. You can use them kind of just all over the face, but this one specifically I wanted to use as a blush, as you might imagine. So I'll go ahead and swatch this. So I guess this is the only other sort of like cream style blush product that I have. This one has a sheen to it, as you can see, but again, even though this is like a cream product technically, these do buff out really, really nicely to a sort of like powdery finish. So I just love the way that that looks. So, and this is a little bit newer to my collection as well, so I will be holding on to it. All right, so I'm just going to assume that this time around, just like the last times where I started off thinking I'd be able to get through all of my blushes in one video and ended up being a blabbermouth, I'm gonna go ahead and stop here and just call this like my single blush declutter. I do have some blush palettes, like I said at the beginning of the video, so that'll be the next blush declutter that I do. But so far, this is what we are looking like in this drawer here, and I do think that I'm going to actually switch things up a little bit when I after I declutter my blush palettes. But this is what this drawer looks like currently. In case you're interested in the numbers, I ended up keeping 29 of my blushes, so there's 29 blushes in here currently. And then these are the blushes that I am getting rid of. There are 11 blushes in here. So these Japonesque ones here, lower Geller ones underneath, Milani, the Becca, little NARS Orgasm blush, the 3 Too Faced Love Blush blushes, and then this single MAC blush. So I think that that is not bad. Definitely have a lot more room in here. And if you want to see the next declutter in this series, which will again will be my blush face palettes, and I'll go ahead and give a little preview of what's down here. There are some kind of like highlighter-y face palettes in here too, but this is what we'll have to tackle in the next installment. But if you want to see how all of this ends up going down, then definitely feel free to subscribe to the channel and give this video a thumbs up if you did enjoy it or found it informative. But either way, thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in my next video. My blush stained fingers say bye.